Chapter 24.
The forces charged towards the gate, making a cloud of dust as they ran. Orion and his legion jumped on their dragons and began to take off, flying. "We're being attacked," said one of the castle guard soldiers as he witnessed this. Meanwhile, Lord Darkshadow and Commander Fiamma were still gathering their forces. Crimson was the first one to reach the gate. He pounded the large wooden door with his sword. Wood crackled and chips of wood and splinters would fly off. Sparks would also fly when he hit the metal bars holding the door instead of the wood. Orion, on the other hand, and two other of his soldiers riding dragons were able to fly above the entrance door, but were met by Lord Darkshadow. "Not so fast there, pretty squirrel," said Lord Darkshadow as he began to charge up a cloud of dark smoke magic spell with his hands. "I will willingly admit, nonetheless, I was not expecting to be attacked by a legion of squirrels riding dragons. Ha ha ha. Thank you for making my day a little less boring. Ha 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 ha. I'll show you what we've got." Orion yelled back. "Ha ha ha. No, you won't," said Lord Darkshadow in a high-pitched giggle and a smirk on his face. Lord Darkshadow propelled the cloud of dark magic towards Orion, which blinded him and the dragon he was riding. He was forced to retreat to the outskirts of the castle once more. "Bring the sages out here," yelled Lord Darkshadow. "Aye, sir," responded one of the mosquito soldiers inside the castle walls. Crimson, Mr. Napoleon, and Mrs. Layla meanwhile were at the gate door still trying to bring it down. Although the wood of the door slowly chipped away at the swing of their swords, it was taking too much time and the Mosquito Queen's army was quickly assembling inside the gate. They could even hear the mosquito soldiers buzzing and others thumping their feet behind the door. "We need to find another solution," said Mr. Napoleon. "This won't work. We're largely outnumbered." "What?" cried Crimson, who put his hands on his knees to catch his breath. "I don't know, but 3 of us won't beat that army even if we do bring down the door," replied Napoleon. "Then we ride dragons," said Crimson. "That's a better idea," replied Mr. Napoleon. "I fear a great unknown power in that castle," said Mrs. Layla, shivering. "What do you mean, dear?" asked Napoleon. "There's something very eerie and rotten in there, I feel it. I don't think any of us know about the real and evil powers there," she said. Crimson and Mr. Napoleon glanced at each other. "We should save our strength, boy," proposed Mr. Napoleon. "Ah!" Crimson yelled in frustration and continued to bang the immense wooden door with his sword. "Battle is not only about strength, dear boy. It's also about intelligence and tactics," said Mr. Napoleon in a soft and gentle voice while he put his hand on Crimson's shoulder. The thumping and buzzing sounds made by the army assembling inside became louder. Meanwhile, Orion, who was propelled out of the castle by Lord Darkshadow's dark thundercloud, was hovering, riding the dragon, and thinking of what to do from a safe distance from the castle. He was also simultaneously analyzing what was going on inside the castle gate. Sages, wearing white and other colored cloaks, began to appear before Lord Darkshadow inside the castle walls. "What do you need, Lord Darkshadow?" asked one of the sages as he arrived at the spot. "What do I need?" "In case you haven't noticed, Sage, we are being attacked by a legion of dragons," he replied. "I thought this was merely one of Commander Fiamma's exercises with his dragon forces," the sage replied with his high-pitched, broken voice. "If this was one of Fiamma's training exercises, I wouldn't be here," exclaimed Lord Darkshadow. "But I already asked him, and he said that these are not his dragons." He continued as he pointed to Orion and his legion flying at the other side of the castle gate. "I see," said the sage. "Nothing that we cannot handle." "I know," said Lord Darkshadow. "We will think of what to do with these dragons. We do not wish to kill them. They are too valuable. They can be trained by Fiamma to be of use to the queen, and we wish to know where they come from as well. They might be more dragons there. So while me and Commander Fiamma think of what to do, we will shield the castle with a protective spell. That's why I summoned you and the other sages." "Uh-huh," exclaimed the sage, seeing the logic and wisdom behind Lord Darkshadow's plan. "Very well. Now let us make a circle. Sages, come forth unto me." instructed Lord Darkshadow. We will administer a protective shield spell upon our Majesty's castle. Aye, aye, the other sages exclaimed in high-pitched, raspy voices. Lord Darkshadow grabbed 2 mosquito soldiers. You will be spies, he said. Go to the back of the castle and hide. You will tell me anything that you see outside. The mosquito soldiers nodded. Go now. You have but a few minutes, exclaimed Lord Darkshadow. Brian, who was seeing all this, understood something was being planned. Something not favorable for them. He then heard Crimson's sword clashing with the wooden gate's metal bars. Crimson, he exclaimed. Get away from there. Crimson nor Mr. Napoleon nor Mrs. Layla could hear Orion. They could only hear Crimson's sword hitting the door and the sounds of the Mosquito Queen's army inside the gate. Orion decided he should go to them. Crimson, he said as he descended. You all need to get away from here. Sages are planning something. They might throw a fireball or something close to here. We need to protect ourselves and plan a strategy. I can do this, yelled Crimson. I know you can, said Mr. Napoleon. But that will get you nowhere but killed or made prisoner. Quick, Crimson, pleaded Orion. We need to get away from here. No, cried Crimson. We're close. I have to save Princess Molly. I've come so far. Inside the castle gate, the sages assembled themselves in a circle. We're ready to administer the spell, Lord Darkshadow, the sage said. Lord Darkshadow took one last glance outside the castle, and he then saw that the spy soldiers were at the outside of the gate, already in the back of the castle. Commence, he said. The sages then grabbed each other's hands. Avidin me Notamark. The sages began to chant. Avidin me Notamark. They chanted this 6 more times. A plasma, white and bluish translucent sphere began to appear in the middle of their circle. Thunder and lightning bolts came from that sphere. Strong winds lifted the capes and moved the cloaks and robes of the sages. They kept on chanting, and the sphere grew larger and larger. It became so large that it encapsulated the entire castle. Crimson, who was outside the gate, felt a shock run through his body as his sword hit the plasma ball, which was already also in the gate itself. He cried and fell to the ground. Orion flew towards them at full speed. He lifted him and placed him, Mr. Napoleon, and Mrs. Layla on the dragon's back. The dragon flew away, taking all of them several yards away, to the trees. The sphere grew bigger, and by now the entire castle structure was about a meter inside the plasma ball. The clear plasma ball was still white, but you could see through it, and in it now radiated rainbow neon-colored lightning. Mr. Napoleon threw a rock at it, and the rock burned on impact, making sparks and lightning before it disintegrated. You're gonna get yourself killed, boy, he then yelled at Crimson. Or one of us. Would you just let go of your ego and think for once? Crimson was silent. He had never seen Mr. Napoleon that upset before. Even Orion had a straight face and was silent. Crimson knew that Mr. Napoleon was right. This quest wasn't about himself. He could now see his vanity in this. He now felt that he was sabotaging the operation. Crimson couldn't even hold his sword anymore. His hands were burnt from the plasma impact with the sword. There was silence. Crimson lowered his face and said nothing. He felt too ashamed to apologize again. He deserved to be yelled at, he concluded. We need magic, Orion said, breaking the silence. Only a spell can break a spell. Or a huge amount of force and power, said Mr. Napoleon. Icones, exclaimed Mrs. Layla. What of her? Asked Orion. She has to know who can do magic, she said. How do you know? Asked Orion. She knows Capra and Raven, said Crimson, finally speaking. Icones, yelled Crimson. Where are you? I'm right here, Icones responded, undisturbed. Ah, Mr. Napoleon exclaimed. You scared me. She was atop a tree, just several meters away from them. Icones giggled. You're right. Capra and Raven know magic, she said. Great. Who else does? Asked Orion. We need as many people as possible. I do, she said, smiling. We know you do. But you won't fight for us, exclaimed Mr. Napoleon. It is not my place to get involved in the politics of the world, she said. What politics? Asked Orion. Your friends are in battle. They need your help. You're the one who asked to join us. Crimson rolled his eyes. I wanted to make new friends, she replied, and this battle is more political than you're aware of. How so? Asked Crimson. Orion, would you care to explain why, or should I? She asked. Everyone glanced at Orion with an intense look. Their eyes, wide open, locked on him. Orion took a deep breath. The Mosquito Queen, he began, as we all know, has total control over most of this world. I would say all of it, said Mrs. Layla. With the diamond stone, she controls lightning at her will. Nobody can beat that power. Her ambitions now are to expand her empire by breeding new mosquitoes. Her sage priests go kidnap creatures all over the land to feed her offspring, said Orion. She needs our blood to thrive, said Mrs. Layla. Indeed, said Icones. In decades, many have tried to bring her down, but all have failed. Their blood becomes supper, continued Orion. But there is a force more powerful than fear, said Layla. Indeed, said Icones. Which is? Asked Crimson. True love, replied Icones. Love is more powerful than fear or death even. Wow! So, said Crimson, because we're friends and we love each other, that means we are more powerful? Close, replied Orion. But we're referring to a different type of love. Romantic love. And you, Sir Crimson, are in love with Princess Molly. I see, said Crimson. I am the chosen one. He giggled at his own sense of humor. The others smiled. Close, said Mr. Napoleon. But you're still flesh and you still bleed. You're not invincible. Nobody is. There is something you need to know, Sir Crimson, said Orion. What is it? He replied. Princess Molly, if the rumors are true, might be engaged to someone else, said Orion. Crimson widened his eyes and looked away, hiding his face. He didn't know how to react. He was embarrassed. He felt the heat of blood blushing to his face. He felt like a fool for believing he had a chance of being with her. He didn't want anyone to see his watery eyes. Why did you tell him, Orion? Whispered Mr. Napoleon. He will abort the mission and abandon us. We were more close than ever to beating the evil queen. At last, Icones said. Some truth here. You all knew about this? Cried Crimson. There was silence. Everyone was now facing down, avoiding Crimson's eyes. How could you, Mr. Perfect? Yelled Crimson, looking at Mr. Napoleon. You are all using me. I hate all of you. Crimson threw down his sword and began to run away. You see, said Mr. Napoleon. I told you he would leave. It had to be done, said Icones. I'm proud of you, Orion. Orion said nothing but looked down. But you still won't help us, he said. I will go talk to him. Then we shall see, she replied.